History loves conquerors who take. Alexander seized empires. Caesar claimed territories. Genghis Khan conquered half the known world. But what about the man who nearly destroyed civilizations by giving? This is the story of Mansa Musa, the emperor of Mali, who took a religious pilgrimage in 1324 and accidentally crashed the Mediterranean economy for over a decade. A man so wealthy that his generosity became a weapon. A ruler so determined to prove his piety that he left economic devastation in his wake. They called him the richest man who ever lived. What they didn't understand was that he'd become something far more dangerous, a walking economic apocalypse wrapped in golden robes. Here's what blows my mind. Musa didn't conquer a single city on his journey. He didn't fire an arrow or unsheath a sword. Yet by the time he returned home, he'd reshaped the geopolitics of 3 continents and forced historians to redraw their maps of Africa. His weapon? Pure, overwhelming, catastrophic generosity. How does a devout Muslim king become an unintentional economic terrorist? How does charity become chaos? And what happens when you're so rich that giving money away destroys more than war ever could? To understand this impossible story, we need to travel back to 14th century West Africa, to a land of gold so abundant that it flowed like water, where salt was worth more than human lives, and where one man controlled more wealth than entire European kingdoms combined. The year is 1312. The Mali Empire stretches across modern-day Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Niger, Nigeria, Chad, and Mauritania. It's the size of Western Europe, controlling the richest gold deposits on Earth and the most critical salt mines of the medieval world. But unlike Europe, fragmented and war-torn, Mali thrives under sophisticated governance, extensive trade networks, and cultural sophistication that would make Renaissance Italy jealous. At its heart sits Niani, the capital city, where merchants from Cairo, Baghdad, and Venice converge to trade in the only place where African gold enters the global economy. Control Mali, and you control the world's gold supply. Control the world's gold supply, and you control everything. Into this seat of unimaginable power steps Mansa Musa, a man whose exact origins remain debated by historians. Some say he was the nephew of the previous emperor, Mansa Abu Bakr II. Others claim he was the grandson of Sundiata Keita, the legendary founder of the Mali Empire. What everyone agrees on, he wasn't supposed to rule. Abu Bakr II had become obsessed with a question that would haunt West African imagination for generations. What lies beyond the Atlantic Ocean? In 1311, he assembled a fleet of 2,000 ships, appointed Musa as deputy ruler, and sailed into the horizon. Only one ship returned, carrying tales of a powerful current that swallowed the fleet whole. Abu Bakr never came back. Suddenly, unexpectedly, Musa found himself emperor of the richest realm on earth, and he had something to prove. Picture the Hague political landscape. To the north, the Islamic caliphates question whether this African Muslim truly follows the faith. To the east, Arab scholars dismiss Mali as a backwater, despite coveting its gold. To the west, European Christians have no idea Mali even exists. And within his own empire, Musa faces the scrutiny of nobles who remember he wasn't the first choice for the throne. For 12 years, Musa rules quietly, efficiently, brilliantly. He expands trade routes. He sponsors scholars. He builds mosques. He consolidates power through strategic marriages and demonstrates the administrative genius that will define his reign. But something gnaws at him, a spiritual debt unpaid, a pillar of faith unfulfilled. Every Muslim is required to make Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, at least once in their lifetime, if physically and financially able. Musa is certainly financially able. In 1324, now secure in his rule and wealthy beyond comprehension, he makes a decision that will echo through history. He will make Hajj, but not just any Hajj. He will make a pilgrimage so magnificent, so overwhelmingly grand, that no one, not the Arabs, not the Europeans, not the historians of the future, will ever question Mali's power, wealth, or his devotion to Islam again. What Musa doesn't realize as he begins preparations for his journey is that he's about to conduct an economic experiment in generosity at a scale never attempted before or since. An experiment that will prove wealth, in sufficient quantities, becomes indistinguishable from destruction. The caravan begins to assemble. Before we witness the legendary journey, understand what Musa inherited and what he built. The Mali Empire of 1324 wasn't accidentally wealthy. It was engineered for economic domination with a sophistication that wouldn't be matched until the Industrial Revolution. Mali controlled the Bambouk and Bure goldfields, deposits so rich that geologists today still marvel at their purity and abundance. But Musa understood something crucial. Gold only has value if you control its supply. So he implemented a state monopoly. Every gold nugget above a certain size belonged to the emperor. Citizens could trade gold dust, but the nuggets, the really valuable pieces, flowed directly to the royal treasury. This kept gold valuable while ensuring unlimited wealth for the crown. Simultaneously, Mali controlled the salt mines of Tagaza in the Sahara. Critical because in West African humidity, salt was essential for food preservation and human survival. Musa's genius was recognizing that controlling both gold and salt meant controlling both luxury and necessity. You controlled what people wanted and what people needed. That's not just wealth, that's power. But Musa wasn't content with passive accumulation. He expanded Mali's reach, not primarily through conquest, but through sophisticated diplomacy and strategic marriages. He brought the key trading cities of Timbuktu, Gao, and Djenné fully into Mali's orbit, transforming them into intellectual and commercial powerhouses. Under his rule, Timbuktu became home to Sankora University, one of the world's first universities, with over 25,000 students studying law, astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. This is where Western history gets Mali catastrophically wrong. This wasn't some tribal kingdom stumbling upon gold deposits. This was a carefully constructed economic empire with written legal codes, sophisticated banking systems using cowrie, shells as currency, and diplomatic relations spanning from Egypt to Andalusia. Musa's early test of character came in 1320, when provinces in the empire's eastern territories attempted rebellion. Rather than crushing them militarily, which he could have easily done, Musa traveled there personally. He listened to grievances, adjusted tax policies, and invested in local infrastructure. The rebels became loyalists. This established his governing philosophy. Power exercised through generosity, not violence. But generosity requires spectacle to be politically effective. And in 1324, Musa decides to create the greatest spectacle in medieval history. The pilgrimage preparations take months. Musa assembles a caravan unlike anything the world has ever seen. The numbers, recorded by multiple Arab historians who witnessed it, seem impossible, yet every source corroborates them. 1,000 men. Let that sink in. 60,000 people embarking on a 4,000-mile journey across the Sahara Desert, through Egypt and into Arabia. For comparison, that's larger than most medieval European armies. It's larger than the population of many European cities. But here's where it gets truly insane. 12,000 of those men are personal slaves, each carrying 4 pounds of gold bars. Do the math. That's 48,000 pounds of solid gold just being carried by slaves. Not transported in wagons, not loaded on camels. Carried by human beings in 4-pound increments to demonstrate that Musa has humans to spare and gold to spare. 500 additional slaves walk ahead of Musa, each carrying a 6-pound solid gold staff. Another 3,000 pounds of gold, turned into staffs, used as walking sticks, because apparently regular walking sticks aren't good enough when you're trying to impress the Islamic world. 80 to 100 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold dust. That's an additional 24,000 to 30,000 pounds of gold in powder form. Why powder? Because you can sprinkle it. You can toss it into crowds. You can make it rain gold dust like some medieval hip-hop video. Wives, children, officials, soldiers, merchants, entertainers, historians, and scholars, all joining what is essentially a mobile city crossing the world's largest desert. Supply lines alone must have been a logistical masterpiece. Every person needed food, water, shelter, and protection. Organizing this caravan required administrative genius that would challenge modern logistics companies. And Musa, at the center, dressed in robes of fine silk and cotton, crowned in gold, riding a horse with gold trim on its saddle. Not because he needs to, but because this journey isn't just about fulfilling a religious obligation. It's about announcing to the world that Mali exists, that Africa is wealthy, sophisticated, and powerful, and that Mansa Musa is a ruler worthy of respect. The caravan leaves Niani in 1324, following trade routes north through the Sahara. The meet, first major stop, the kingdom of Walata, at the desert's edge. Here, Musa performs his first act of legendary generosity, distributing gold to the poor, funding mosque construction, and essentially doubling the town's wealth overnight. The local merchants are thrilled. The local economy is confused. What happens when someone introduces massive amounts of money into a small economy? We're about to find out, repeatedly, across 3 continents. As they traverse the Sahara, Musa establishes a pattern that will define the entire journey. Every Friday, he stops for communal prayer and distributes gold. Every town they pass, he funds mosque construction. Every poor person who approaches, he gives gold. It's not charity, it's calculated political theater, designed to demonstrate that Mali's wealth is so vast that giving it away doesn't matter. But economics doesn't care about political theater. Economics cares about supply and demand. And Musa is about to flood the supply side so catastrophically that demand becomes irrelevant. The caravan crosses the Sahara, losing men to heat and dehydration despite the extensive preparations. Even wealth can't defeat the desert entirely. Musa himself later admits that the crossing tested his faith. Watching men die while carrying gold bars must have raised uncomfortable questions about the purpose of wealth. 8 months after leaving Mali, the caravan crests a sand dune, and in the distance, the Nile Valley spreads before them. Cairo, the jewel of the Islamic world, waits ahead, home to the Mamluk Sultanate, sophisticated merchants, renowned scholars, and a population that thinks they've seen everything. They haven't seen Mansa Musa. Cairo, 1324. The greatest city in the Islamic world, home to 500,000 people, buzzing with commerce, scholarship, and intrigue. Word has spread through North African trade networks about an African king approaching with unimaginable wealth. The Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad sends representatives to greet this mysterious visitor. What happens next becomes the most documented part of Musa's entire journey. Recorded by Arab historians Ibn Fadl Allah al-Omari, al-Maqrizi, and Ibn Battuta, who visited Mali years later and collected first-hand accounts. Their writings, preserved in Arabic libraries, give us an almost day-by-day account of the economic chaos about to unfold. Musa enters Cairo with his full entourage, 60,000 strong, gold staffs gleaming in the sun, camels laden with gold dust. The entire spectacle designed to overwhelm the senses. The streets empty as residents flood to witness this impossible sight. Cairo has hosted powerful rulers before, but none quite like this. Here's where Musa makes his first diplomatic miscalculation. Sultan al-Nasir Mohammed expects Musa to prostrate himself according to protocol when meeting a fellow Muslim ruler. Musa refuses, not out of arrogance, but out of religious principle. He will prostrate only before Allah, not before any man, regardless of rank. The Sultan's advisors are scandalized. This is a breach of protocol that could justify diplomatic hostility, even imprisonment. Tensions mount in the royal palace, but Musa has an advantage that transcends protocol: unlimited money. Imagine you're Sultan al-Nasir Mohammed. You're annoyed at this African king's refusal to follow proper etiquette. You're considering how to respond without creating an international incident. Then Musa opens his coffers. He gives the Sultan 50,000 gold dinars as a gift, just as an opening gesture. That's roughly 500 pounds of gold, handed over casually as if it's pocket change. The Sultan's annoyance evaporates. Protocol suddenly seems less important than maintaining good relations with this walking treasure vault. But Musa is just getting started. Over the next 3 months in Cairo, he systematically destroys the Egyptian economy through aggressive generosity. He gives alms to the poor, thousands of gold dinars distributed daily. Every poor person who approaches receives gold. Every beggar becomes temporarily wealthy. The streets fill with people who've never touched gold before, suddenly holding more wealth than they've seen in their lifetimes. He purchases goods and services, vastly overpaying for everything. A servant brings him water? Gold coin. A merchant sells him fabric? 20 times the asking price. A scholar discusses theology? Funded for life. Musa seems incapable of making a reasonable transaction. Every exchange becomes an exercise in excessive generosity. He funds mosque construction and renovation throughout the city. He sponsors scholars and poets. He buys so many souvenirs and supplies for the onward journey that merchants triple their prices, and he pays without negotiating. The economic impact is immediate and catastrophic. Gold, which had been valuable and scarce, suddenly floods the market. Basic economics dictates what happens next. When supply massively exceeds demand, value collapses. Al-Omari, writing 12 years later, documented the aftermath. Gold was at a high price in Egypt until they came in that year. The mithqal, a gold coin, did not go below 25 dirhams and was generally above. But from that time, its value fell and it cheapened in price and has remained cheap till now. Translate that. Gold prices in Egypt dropped by approximately 25% and stayed depressed for over a decade. That might not sound catastrophic until you realize what it meant in medieval economics. Merchants who had stored wealth in gold suddenly found their savings worth a quarter less. Trade agreements based on gold standard pricing became unprofitable. International merchants who traveled to Egypt expecting stable gold prices found their business models destroyed. Fixed incomes in gold became worth significantly less. Prices of goods skyrocketed as merchants tried to compensate for gold's devaluation. Musa had created inflation on a scale not seen again until modern governments started printing currency without restraint, and he'd done it accidentally through pure generosity. But Musa doesn't understand what he's done. From his perspective, He's fulfilling his religious obligations and demonstrating Mali's power. The fact that Cairo's economy is in chaos doesn't register as his problem. He's got a pilgrimage to complete. After 3 months in Cairo, during which he's given away so much gold that his retinue's supplies start running low, Musa's caravan continues northeast toward the Red Sea. They cross the Sinai Peninsula, enter Arabia, and finally, after nearly a year of traveling, approach Mecca. For Musa, this is the spiritual core of the journey. Everything else, the spectacle, the generosity, the political theater, was preparation for this moment. Entering the holy city as a pilgrim, completing the rituals of Hajj, praying at the Kaaba, standing before the house of God as a humble servant, rather than a powerful emperor. Eyewitness accounts describe Musa weeping during prayers, distributing gold to Meccan poor, funding infrastructure improvements, and engaging in deep theological discussions with Islamic scholars. For a brief moment, he seems to find what he was seeking: spiritual validation, acceptance by the wider Islamic community, and confirmation that his wealth carries divine favor. He completes all the Hajj rituals with meticulous devotion. He drinks from the Zamzam well. He walks between Safa and Marwa. He stands in prayer at Mount Arafat. He stones the devil at Mina. And through it all, he gives, and gives, and gives. But Arabia's economy is more robust than Cairo's. The constant flow of pilgrims from around the Islamic world means Mecca and Medina are used to wealthy visitors. Musa's generosity is noted, praised, and absorbed without the catastrophic impact seen in Egypt. It's not that Arabia has more gold, it's that their economy is built around managing wealthy pilgrims. After completing Hajj, most pilgrims would return home immediately. But Musa has been transformed by the journey. He's met scholars from Al-Andalus, poets from Persia, architects from Syria. He's seen the architectural wonders of Cairo's mosques and Mecca's sacred sites. And he's developed a vision: transform Mali into an intellectual and architectural jewel worthy of the Islamic world's respect. He begins recruiting poets, scholars, architects, and craftsmen. Musa offers them salaries that boggle their minds to return with him to Mali. One recruit in particular will reshape Mali's future. Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, known as S-Sahili, a renowned architect and poet from Granada, S-Sahili agrees to travel to Mali for an astronomical sum: 200,000 gold dinars annually. That's 2,000 pounds of gold per year in salary. For one architect, the numbers are so outrageous that historians debated their accuracy for centuries until archaeological evidence confirmed the scale of construction projects as Sahili later undertook in Mali, with his entourage now expanded. With scholars and craftsmen, Musa begins the return journey. But there's a problem. He's given away so much gold that he's actually running low on supplies. Not broke. Mansa Musa can't go broke, but uncomfortably short on liquid capital for the journey home. This is where we see Musa's financial sophistication. Rather than admitting he overspent, he approaches Egyptian merchants and brokers in Cairo and negotiates loans. Yes, the richest man in history had to borrow money. The irony is delicious. The Egyptians, seeing an opportunity to reclaim some of the gold Musa distributed, offer loans at significant interest rates. Musa accepts, knowing he'll repay them easily once he reaches Mali's gold mines. Some historians argue this was calculated from the beginning. Distribute gold to inflate prices, then borrow it back at inflated value, essentially giving Mali even more economic leverage. Whether calculated or accidental, it works. Musa secures enough loans to properly supply his return journey. And in a move that displays either financial genius or petty revenge, he repays the loans so quickly upon returning to Mali that he actually helps restabilize Cairo's gold market. The sudden repayment, representing a massive gold influx back to Egypt, partially corrects the inflation he caused. It takes another 8 months to return to Niani. The caravan that departed 60,000 strong returns with perhaps 40,000. Some stayed in holy cities. Some died during travel. Some remained in Cairo or Mecca as ambassadors or representatives. But Musa returns with something more valuable than numbers: legitimacy. He's completed Hajj in the most spectacular fashion in Islamic history. Arab historians are writing about him. His name is spreading across the Islamic world and beyond. And he's bringing architects, scholars, and artisans who will transform Mali's cities. Upon returning to Niani in 1325, after nearly 2 years abroad, Musa immediately puts his vision into action. Es-Saheli begins designing and constructing mosques using burnt brick, a technique new to West Africa, where most buildings used mud brick. The Jinguereber Mosque in Timbuktu, completed under Es-Saheli's direction, stands today, over 700 years later, as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Musa doesn't just build mosques. He establishes madrasas, Islamic schools, in every major city. He expands Sankore University, attracting scholars from across the Islamic world with generous salaries and the promise of access to Mali's growing libraries. He commissions a royal palace that, according to descriptions, featured gardens, fountains, and architectural sophistication rivaling anything in Cairo. Trade flourishes. With Mali's reputation enhanced by the pilgrimage, merchants from farther afield seek trading relationships. European merchants, who previously barely knew Mali existed, begin sending representatives. The Catalan Atlas, created in 1375, features Mansa Musa prominently, the only sub-Saharan African leader depicted, shown sitting on a throne holding a gold nugget, with the caption describing him as the richest and most noble king in all the land. For the next 12 years, Musa rules at the peak of Mali's power. His empire expands, though more through diplomacy and trade than conquest. He annexes the important trading city of Gao, giving Mali control over even more trade routes. He establishes diplomatic relations with Morocco, Egypt, and potentially with Marinid Sultanate, in modern-day Morocco. But the journey's consequences continue rippling outward. What Musa doesn't fully grasp, what perhaps no one in the 14th century could fully grasp, is that he's changed the geopolitical calculus of 3 continents through a single journey. In Europe, the Catalan Atlas puts Mali on the map literally and figuratively. European monarchs and merchants suddenly realize there's a source of gold in West Africa, so abundant it can crash economies through generosity alone. This knowledge plants seeds that won't fully sprout for another century. But they're planted nonetheless. The desire to bypass Arab middlemen and access African gold directly. Some historians argue Musa's pilgrimage inadvertently set in motion the European age of exploration. Portuguese navigators, studying Arab trade routes and hearing tales of Mali's wealth, begin pushing down Africa's western coast in the early 1400s. By 1471, the Portuguese reach the Gold Coast, modern Ghana, establishing direct European-African trade for the first time. The line from Musa's 1324 pilgrimage to 1471's Portuguese arrival isn't straight, but it exists. Within Mali, the consequences are more immediate and more personal. The massive expenditure on the pilgrimage, even for someone as wealthy as Musa, strains the empire's resources. The gold monopoly remains, but Musa has demonstrated that gold isn't infinite. The mystique of unlimited wealth, once revealed to have limits, becomes a weakness. Vassal states begin questioning their tribute obligations. If Musa had to borrow money in Cairo, perhaps Mali isn't as invincible as it appears. Small rebellions spark in distant provinces. Nothing Musa can't handle, but the perception of absolute power has cracked. More troubling are the internal changes to Mali's economy. By demonstrating that gold can be given away with such abandon, Musa has accidentally devalued his own currency. Merchants within Mali begin demanding more gold for goods, creating internal inflation that mirrors what happened in Cairo. The gold dust currency system becomes unstable, forcing Musa to implement price controls and market regulations that hadn't been necessary before. The scholars and artisans Musa brought from the Islamic world, while culturally enriching Mali, create social tensions. Traditional griots, West African historians and storytellers, find themselves competing with Arabic scholarship. Islamic architectural styles clash with traditional West African aesthetics. The royal court becomes divided between traditionalists, who remember Mali before the Hajj, and cosmopolitan modernizers who want Mali to fully integrate into the broader Islamic world. Musa navigates these tensions with the same skill he demonstrated during his early reign. He patronizes both traditional griots and Arab scholars. He commissions buildings that blend West African and Islamic styles. He maintains Mali's traditional governance structures while adopting Islamic legal frameworks for international trade. It's a delicate balance that requires constant attention. Then, in 1330, Mali faces an unexpected threat. The Mossi Kingdom to the south, seeing Mali focused on Islamic cultural projects and internal reorganization, launches raids into Mali's southern territories. For the first time in Musa's reign, military force becomes necessary. But Musa has become, in some ways, a victim of his own legend. His reputation as a generous, peaceful ruler makes the military response complex. Can he order violent suppression after spending 2 years demonstrating magnanimous generosity? Can the man who gave Cairo gold now take Mossi lives? He can, and he does, but with notable reluctance. Mali's armies repel the Mossi incursions, but reports suggest Musa offered generous peace terms rather than pursuing total victory. Some historians interpret this as wisdom. Why create permanent enemies when you can create temporary allies? Others see it as weakness. A ruler who's lost the killer instinct necessary for empire building. The truth, as always, is more complicated. Musa understood something that most medieval rulers didn't. Empires built on violence require constant violence to maintain. Empires built on economic dependence and cultural prestige are more stable. By making Mali the economic and intellectual center of West Africa, he created a form of power that didn't require military enforcement. But that form of power has a weakness. It requires continued economic dominance. And in the 1330s, new gold sources are being discovered elsewhere in West Africa. Mali's monopoly is loosening. Not catastrophically, Mali remains dominant. But the trajectory has shifted from absolute control to competitive advantage. Musa responds by investing even more heavily in education and infrastructure. If Mali can't maintain gold monopoly through control alone, it will maintain dominance through having the best schools, the most sophisticated markets, and the most extensive trade networks. Timbuktu becomes, according to contemporary accounts, home to over 100,000 residents, making it one of Africa's largest cities. Its libraries contain hundreds of thousands of manuscripts on subjects ranging from astronomy to medicine to law. This is Musa's final great insight. Wealth isn't just material resources. Wealth is knowledge, infrastructure, and networks. The gold will eventually run out or lose its monopoly. The empire built on education and trade can adapt. In 1337, after 25 years of rule that transformed Mali from a powerful regional kingdom into a globally recognized empire, Mansa Musa dies. The cause is unknown, possibly old age, possibly illness. His son, Magan, inherits an empire at its peak, but also an empire facing new challenges. The succession is smooth, which itself is a testament to Musa's governance. Magan takes power without civil war, without noble rebellion, without succession crisis. This stability, this peaceful transfer of power in a medieval empire, is rarer than gold itself. But Magan lacks his father's vision and administrative genius. Within years, Mali begins the slow decline that will take centuries to complete. The empire remains powerful throughout the 14th century, but the forward momentum stops. Vassal states gradually assert independence. Gold mines in other regions reduce Mali's market control. The intellectual flowering Musa initiated continues, but without the royal patronage driving constant expansion. So what do we make of Mansa Musa? History offers no simple answer. By traditional metrics of power, territory controlled, wealth accumulated, military victories, he ranks among medieval history's most successful rulers. He expanded Mali's borders, increased its wealth, and maintained stability throughout his reign. The empire he left was stronger than the one he inherited. By economic metrics, he's both genius and cautionary tale. His manipulation of gold markets, whether intentional or accidental, demonstrated that currency is belief as much as metal. He proved that wealth in sufficient concentration becomes its own kind of power, but also that this power can backfire spectacularly. Cairo's decade-long inflation teaches us that generosity without economic understanding creates chaos, not prosperity. By cultural metrics, his legacy shines brightest. The intellectual traditions he established in Timbuktu persisted for centuries. Manuscripts written during and after his reign survive in libraries today, containing advanced mathematics, astronomy, and medicine that challenge Western narratives about medieval Africa. The architectural innovations Es-Saheli introduced influenced West African building for generations. But here's what haunts me about Musa's story. He's remembered today primarily for his wealth, the one thing that meant least to him personally. His pilgrimage, the spiritual journey that defined his reign, gets reduced to the guy who crashed gold prices. His intellectual legacy, the universities and libraries he built, barely registers in popular consciousness. The peaceful governance and diplomatic brilliance get overshadowed by stories about gold-carrying slaves. This is the final price Musa paid. His success was so spectacular, so overwhelming, that it became impossible to see the man behind the gold. He wanted to prove Mali's sophistication, Islamic devotion, and cultural achievement. He succeeded so completely that people only remember the wealth. There's a lesson here about power and perception. Musa understood that spectacle shapes narrative. He couldn't control how Arab chroniclers would portray Mali, but he could ensure they portrayed Mali as wealthy beyond imagination. The problem with using wealth as your primary messaging tool, wealth becomes your primary message. Modern estimates of Musa's wealth range from 400 billion to impossible to calculate. These numbers are meaningless. Medieval economics don't translate to modern values. What matters isn't the dollar amount, but the relative power. And Musa controlled more of the world's gold supply than any individual before or since. But wealth, as Musa discovered, creates as many problems as it solves. It attracts attention, invites envy, and warps economies. His generosity in Cairo, meant to demonstrate strength, revealed dependence on a single commodity. His recruitment of Arab scholars, intended to elevate Mali's culture, created social tensions between Islamic and traditional African practices. His architectural projects, designed to showcase permanence, required maintenance that later rulers couldn't sustain. This is why I call him the most dangerous man alive. Not because he intended harm, but because his power was so concentrated that his actions had unintended consequences spanning continents and generations. He was dangerous the way a tsunami is dangerous. Overwhelming force moving in one direction, reshaping everything in its path, indifferent to the destruction left behind. Yet I can't shake the feeling that Musa would be disappointed by this framing. He wanted to be remembered as a pious Muslim who fulfilled his religious obligations spectacularly. He wanted Mali remembered as a center of learning and culture. He wanted to prove that Africa was sophisticated, powerful, and worthy of respect. In some ways, he succeeded. The Catalan Atlas, placing him prominently, proved European awareness of African power. The scholarly networks he established made Timbuktu synonymous with knowledge for centuries. His architectural projects survived. Into the modern era, physical proof of medieval African sophistication. In other ways, he failed. Mali's empire eventually fragmented. Timbuktu's libraries were destroyed or scattered. European colonizers used the same routes Musa's gold created to extract resources and people from Africa. The continent he wanted to elevate became, in later centuries, the continent most exploited. But this failure isn't Musa's fault. He couldn't predict the age of exploration, couldn't foresee European colonialism, couldn't imagine a future where Africa's wealth would be extracted rather than developed. He operated within 14th century frameworks and, by 14th century standards, built something remarkable. The real question isn't whether Musa succeeded or failed. It's whether we've learned anything from his story, about the power and peril of concentrated wealth, about the unintended consequences of economic manipulation, about the difference between spectacle and substance, about the importance of cultural institutions that outlast individual rulers. Because here's the thing: Musa's gold is gone. The treasure he distributed across the Mediterranean corroded, was melted down, was lost to history. But the Jinguereber Mosque still stands in Timbuktu. Sankore University's manuscripts are being digitized and preserved. The memory of an African empire that stretched across a continent persists. What would you have done in Musa's position? You control more wealth than any individual on earth. You want to prove your faith, your culture's sophistication, your empire's power. Do you hoard it, maintaining control, but reinforcing narratives of African isolation? Or do you spend it spectacularly, risking economic chaos, but ensuring no one can ignore your existence? There is no right answer. That's what makes Musa's choice so compelling. He chose spectacle, chose generosity, chose to make himself impossible to ignore. The price was economic chaos, social tensions, and being reduced to his wealth in historical memory. The reward was ensuring that Mali, that Africa, that he himself could never be erased from history. In a medieval world that routinely ignored or minimized African achievements, perhaps making it impossible to ignore was the greatest achievement possible. Even if the consequences echoed in ways he never intended, even if generosity became a weapon, even if the most dangerous thing about him was how spectacularly he gave everything away. What's your take on Mansa Musa? Enlightened ruler who elevated his culture? Economic terrorist who destroyed through generosity? Spiritual seeker whose devotion changed history? Or all of these simultaneously, a man too complex for simple categorization? If you found this story fascinating, let us know in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into the underrepresented stories that shaped our world, the rulers, rebels, and visionaries that history textbooks forgot, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Because history isn't just about the conquerors everyone remembers. Sometimes it's about the man who gave so much away that he accidentally conquered through generosity alone.